Welcome back, everybody that has been attending the previous two presentations of two previous live events. And if this is your first time, this is the third of 4 live events for ODI. All 4 of them are walking through the Oracle by example learning modules that are on the start page of ODI. So when you install the ODI product, right on the start page, it says, do these 4 tutorials. And so if you want, you can go back and do these tutorials yourself, or you can go to OLL. You can do www.oracle.com/go-to/OLL, and then search for ODI 12C, and you can find these as well. So you can go through and do them yourself. Disclaimer that your mileage may vary. This happens to be live code. It's 12.1.2, but as patches come out, things may look a little bit different. So the particular environment we're going to be exercising today is using database 12C, and it works perfectly fine under other databases. It works for MySQL, it works for IBM DB2, and it will be using ODI 12.1.2, as we mentioned. It presumes that you have some basic knowledge of SQL, and the agent in particular is going to be discussing WebLogic Server. It turns out that you have to have WebLogic Server somewhere. If you don't have it installed, ODI will install it for you. It's required to run the studio, though it can be entirely under the covers if you wish. All right, and then again, it assumes that we have some basic knowledge of the database. As I mentioned, this particular Oracle by example exists at this website, and if you don't want to type all that in, you could simply do a search for OLL, OBE, ODI 12C, and you'd find it as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the GUI part of ODI, and the GUI part is called ODI Studio. ODI Studio is made up of these 4 components, and we're going to spend most of our time in the topology one today, which is where we create the agents. In the previous examples, the previous OBEs, we did designer and topology both. So where does this fit in the big scheme of things? As I mentioned, we're going to be using the studio, and we're going to be using topology in the studio. And what we're going to be doing is configuring the agent. The agent needs to run in some sort of a JVM. So it could be a standalone agent in a JVM, or it could be in WebLogic Server, in which case it's just an application within that. Or you could have a separate JVM as well. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, which sort of begs the question, which of the environments are we going to do? Let's just kind of recap this a little bit more cleanly. There are 3 very distinct environments. Distinct environment number 1 is I have WebLogic Server and I intend to use it. So if I intend to use it, then what I can do is I can make a JEE agent, and that's what you'll see on the ODI options is JEE agent. And if you do, the agent will exist, but you need to deploy it in WebLogic. You need to start it in WebLogic, and it assumes that WebLogic's got its own domain controller. It's got its own managed servers. So it assumes that you've got the full administration of WebLogic. That's not what we're going to do today. The second option is you could have WebLogic out there, but you could choose to ignore it. If you choose to ignore it, then what will happen is ODI will install enough pieces of WebLogic to use it, but it will make its own domain controller, make its own managed servers, and it will be responsible for starting and stopping the agent itself. And so that's what we're going to do with the standalone co-located agent, which is what we're going to do today. It's standalone in the sense that it doesn't use WebLogic Server, but it's co-located in the sense that it can use some of the libraries of WebLogic Server. The third option is where there's no WebLogic Server at all. And if you're going to do that, where you have some other JVM, The problem is you lose Studio. So this is actually an unrealistic single environment, but it may be part of a larger environment. So suppose you have ODI in a distributed environment where there's an ODI master console somewhere, and that's got WebLogic Server, and then you may have 8 or 10 databases distributed around the country. Each one of them could be running in a completely standalone mode. If you want to do that, then there's a separate OBE which you can use, and both this OBE and that one point to each other, and it will show you the different steps. But remember, if I'm in completely standalone mode, there still must be WebLogic Server somewhere to run the Studio. All right, so that's the environment we're going to be playing in. Let's do the actual demo. And as I had mentioned before, this is a VM that is running Oracle Linux, but it could just as easily be running Microsoft Windows. And we're going to be, let's look at the stuff that's out here. Okay. We have Oracle 12c database, but it could just as easily be 11 database. And so we'll be running that. In this particular case, we're going to be making procedures that load tables. And in order to do that, we're going to need agents. And so this first part of the OBE is to make the agent. And then on Friday, we'll make the scenario that loads the tables. So the ultimate target is going to be an Oracle 12c database, but it could just as easily be any other database. We have ODI installed in the middleware. And as I mentioned, ODI must have WebLogic Server in the same middleware home. If you don't have a license for WebLogic Server, it will go ahead and install the bits it needs anyway in order to use that stuff. Okay, so let's proceed on. And if you're following along in the OBE, what we just did is we described the environment that we've got. Instead of doing a JEE agent, which would require full WebLogic administrator knowledge, and instead of doing a completely standalone agent, which is actually an unrealistic environment because somewhere there needs to be WebLogic Server, we're going to do the middle of the three, which is a standalone co-located. It's standalone in the sense that WebLogic Server is out there, but we're not, that's the co-located part. It's co-located with WebLogic Server, but it's standalone in the sense that we will not use any of the WebLogic Server commands to administer the agent itself. Okay, so let's charge in. The first thing we want to do is we want to configure the domain that's going to house this. So you can see that we are in the ODI home. And so we'll switch to the common bin. And in there, we're going to do some WebLogic things. So we'll do config.shell script, which will make a domain. Now, you may find config.shell script in other directories as well. For instance, there's one in the WebLogic server. But this is the one we want, the one that's in ODI. So we launch it, which will invoke the GUI. And since we are ignoring the fact that WebLogic Server is out there, we want to create our own domain. By default, it's going to stick it in the Fusion middleware home, user projects domains, and it'll call it base domain. If I was using WebLogic Server, the full power of it, I would update an existing domain. So we'll take the defaults here, just simply taking the defaults. And the templates that we're going to use are based on how we installed ODI. If you installed ODI standalone, you would not see half of these things. But because we installed ODI EE, we have a bunch of different options. The one that we want is the standalone co-located. And so by checking it, you see that it picks up a couple of other things as well. What you don't want is the Oracle Data Integrator agent. If you do that, then you'll need to deploy it using WebLogic Server or some other JVM. So we want the standalone co-located. Click on Next. And if you're familiar with WebLogic Server, this is going to look like very much the same screens. Waiting for it to invoke. And so it's going to ask for the name of the domain user. And for purposes of this demo, I'm using the same password everywhere. That way I won't have to think. There are password complexity constraints on this particular password. It needs to be one capital letter. It needs to be mixed case. It needs to have a number. It needs to be 8 characters. It tells you right there what it needs. So we'll just put in welcome 1. Since this is a JVM, it wants to know which JVM, so we'll just take the default, Oracle Hotspot. Just take the default on that. Now this panel, you need to do 2 separate things. The first thing we want to do is put in the full service name, and then we want to change the host. Now, in this particular case, we're assuming that everything is all on one host. In a realistic environment, you probably will have agents distributed around your environment, and that would be the case where you would run a completely standalone agent. So we configured the service table, this development service table. We configured that with part of RCU, and the password for it was welcome 1. And then what we want to do is just what it says. Click the Get Configuration first. Notice that Next is not even an option yet. So we click Get Configuration first, which is kind of like test, and it verifies that we can actually reach all of those things. And now that it's figured out what that schema looks like for the service table, now the Next is available. So we click on Next. Now this is a little bit tricky. In a traditional WebLogic Server configuration wizard, it makes configuration files which are completely standalone and don't actually impact anything. However, what's going to happen here is that it's not only going to do that, it is going to write things. So this particular configuration wizard is going to write to all the OPSS information. And because it does actually write to it, if you change your mind and decide that you don't want to use this particular domain that you've created, you must run RCU a second time. You get exactly 1 shot at doing this because it writes to OPSS. If, like I said, if you change your mind, if you want to do something different, you must create a second or yet another OPSS schema using RCU. So bear in mind we get exactly 1 shot. So we'll say, okay, this is our first shot, so we'll do Next. It verifies that it can reach everybody, which is fine. And so this is the same information we filled out before. If your systems were located on different hosts, you would reflect that over here in different hosts. So nothing to do here. It already did the test selected configuration connections. We don't need to do that again. We'll click on Next. And you must select system components. It's not selected for you, but you must do that. These other options here would allow you to do more sophisticated WebLogic things, which are beyond the scope of this OBE and are unnecessary, but you must go ahead and configure system components. So we'll do that. Click Next. And now it's going to start naming the agents. Since we only have 1 agent, we can accept the defaults. If we ended up having multiple agents, we'd call the next one Agent 2, Agent 3, etc. And the only choice we have is ODI. Oh, there is another choice. Didn't even realize that. So we want the ODI component, which is the default. So we haven't actually changed anything. So we click on Next. And this server listen port is the server listen port for the agent. We need to remember that number. So write that down somewhere. The supervisor username for ODI is supervisor, and the password can't possibly be that long. So we type over it with welcome 1. And so the only thing we changed is the password, and you have to write down the listen port. So then we'll hit Next. You have the option of doing some WebLogic things, but we're going to ignore that. We'll take the defaults for the machines. You have the option of assigning the agent to different machines, but we've only got one, so we're going to just take the defaults on it. This is mostly a summary. You probably aren't going to do anything at this point, but this is all the stuff that gets installed to support agent. If you had an existing WebLogic server domain, then it probably has some of these things in it, and we would simply extend it with the agent. But here, as you see, we scroll down. Here's the OPSS stuff we talked about. Here's the actual agent stuff. It's a little blurry there. Don't know why that's blurry, but that's the actual application. Maybe I can do this. No, it's just making it worse. Never mind. Okay, so we're not going to do anything to this. We're just looking at it. So we're going to click on Create. And it does the first part very quickly. And the OPSS, as you remember before, that's actually writing something. So this is not just simply making a domain the way a regular WebLogic server config wizard would do. This is writing something to the database. And as I mentioned, if you decide that you later don't want to use this particular domain, then you must either clear out the RCU or run RCU a second time to make another OPSS. There's exactly one agent per OPSS schema. You can make multiple OPSS schemas, but it's a different process. You need to go ahead and do that. But since this is our first one, we can get to do this just fine. So it takes a couple of seconds for this to happen, and then once it gets past OPSS, it goes very quickly. Okay, you notice that once it got past OPSS on the left, and the rest of it goes very quickly. Don't let that 0% fool you. It's actually almost done. See that? Nothing like incremental updates, right? So it goes 0, 0, 0, 0, 100. I love it. Meanwhile, this domain finished. So it finished successfully. That's what you're looking for. And if you're curious, you can manage the thing using the web console. But again, that presumes a fair amount of WebLogic server familiarity. We will choose not to administer it that way, but rather to administer it through ODI. So we'll just simply click on Finish. Okay, so that completed section 1 of the OBE. The next step is to start the ODI part. So we flip over to the Studio, and we're going to run the Studio shell. So this will start back up. And we've already created all of the topology. We created the repositories. We did all that work in the previous OBEs. By the way, these are the tutorials I was mentioning. So we are in the middle of doing this one to create an agent. And so if you install ODI, you can come back and redo these at any time. And then Friday, we're going to do procedures and scenarios. Technically, you could do these in either order, but you need both of them completed before you can get it actually done. So rather arbitrarily, we'll do the agent first, and then we'll do the procedures and scenarios second. So we want to connect to the repository we've been playing with. We've got the various logins stored in a wallet. So here's supervisor and welcome one, which is, by the way, what we put in that domain. So we'll sign on as supervisor. That will populate the topology with what we've been doing. And if you remember, Monday, we created the file generic, and we created file generic under ODI demo file. We also created Oracle, DBHR. We did all that on Monday, and that's still there. Good thing. What we're going to do today is work with the agent. So when I click on agent, you see currently there aren't any. When I ran the load of the continents table the last time, it said using local agent, which is actually no agent at all. So what we want to do is we want to make a new agent. And the name of the agent is what we saw in the wizard. And that needs to match. Localhost is correct. And this needs to be changed. And remember, we wrote down the number. Doesn't have to be this number. You could use any number you want as long as they both match. So we changed the name to match what the wizard was creating. And we said if we did this again, we'd have agent 2, agent 3, agent 007. And then the port needs to match as well. So we got that taken care of. This is in italic, and the diskette shows up. So we click on the diskette. It then saves it. This becomes not italic, and then it now shows up as a list of agents. Okay? So now that that's created, notice we did not test it yet. We just simply have it registered in the database. The next part of the OBE is step 2.2, which is to go and see what that just created for us. So let's go back to the, let's go back to the command prompts. And if we go to Fusion Middleware Home, User Projects, Domains, Base, Bin, it created a bunch of things for us. In particular, you see that we have start and stop commands for WebLogic Server. In particular, I want to mention the Node Manager. The Node Manager is a tool of WebLogic Server that will try to restart processes if they were to crash or the server comes back up, or basically it manages the starting of background services. So that's an option you can do. As it is, we're going to start the agent manually. However, if there's a disaster, you'll need to restart the agent manually. So at some point in the future, you may want to look at possibly fiddling with the Node Manager. But this is the thing that we're going to use. And so we're going to start the agent manually by doing agents. And then we want to specify the name that we have been working with. This one is going to be agent 1, and some other machine is agent 2, etc. And remember, we had to write down the port number. And so we're going to start that agent. Since this is the first time I've run it on this machine, I'm going to get tons of output. So there's a lot of Java things that need to be loaded, a lot of classes need to be found, and it's going to spend quite a bit of time telling me all about that. So remember, it's echoing the port, it's echoing the host address. Here's all of the jars that are coming in. If I run this a second time, all of these jars will already be loaded, and so it will go much faster. And what I'm looking for at the very end of this is this message here. The scheduler is started for work repository work rep on agent so-and-so on port 29910. So everything looks happy. So we're going to leave this running. You need to leave this window running. So while we leave it running, we go back to ODI. You know, I think it'd be fun if I could watch this in the background. And now we're going to click on the test. So the agent's running in the background. Now we click on the test, and it works. Okay, had we not started the agent, the test would have failed. So you leave this open, start the agent in the background, and then you can run the test. Okay, that completes the physical agent. And if you remember the last time we did this, we had both physical and logical. If I look under logical, remember we had logical files. We set up myflat files, which was the DBHR. We also set up a logical architecture for Oracle, just to show you what that's still out there. We set up logical architecture for DBHR that mapped all that stuff. And in the same way, if we have a physical agent, we need to set up a logical agent. So when I click on the plus, you see I haven't got any. So what I'm going to do is make a new logical agent. And the new logical agent is going to be called anything I want. It doesn't have to match anything. And it has a context of global Remember here that context, that's the only context we've got, but we could have other contexts like development or production. And the physical agent that it matches to is the only one we've got. And then we save our work for it. And so now the agent exists. Okay. If we're interested in looking at it, we can double click on it. And that's all there is. So it's pretty simple. So not a lot going on with the logical agent. The physical agent is defined over here. And then and if we test it, we should see this actually pop in the background here. So that it's sitting in the background waiting for the scheduler to schedule some work, right? And that's pretty simple. So that's the extent of it. So we configured the agent. We use the domain configuration wizard to make a WebLogic server domain. And it's in the traditional location where we have that sort of stuff. So if we flip back over to, this is where we are. We're in user projects, domains, base domain bin, which is where that stuff normally lives. And we created a physical and a logical representation of it. And now it's waiting for the scheduler. So what we're going to do on Friday is we're going to come back and create several scenario procedures, and then scenarios, which is a compiled procedure. And then we'll leave this agent out there, and then we'll run it. Just for kicks, let me just show you something real quick. If I stop the agent from here, and then restart the agent, you'll notice it'll be a lot less verbiage, because those jars are already processed. So we saw that message before. The host in question. And that's it. So you see all of that verbiage you saw before about processing the new jar, that's just a one-time thing. And if we flip back over to the ODI, that should still be successful for testing. And one last experiment just to prove that it's actually doing something. I'm going to stop it again. And now when I flip back over to the agent, and now when I test it, it should fail because it's not running. So that concludes what I was going to do in the demo. The agent so far is sitting out there with nothing to do. On Friday, as I mentioned, we will come back and create a procedure, which is going to, in our example, will populate a table, and then we'll schedule it. And the schedule is what invokes the agent. The agent's sitting out there waiting for the scheduler, and the scheduler will then throw these scenarios, which are compiled procedures, to run at a later time. All right, well, thank you, everybody. This was a little bit on the shorter side, but we'll, we needed to break at a logical stopping point, and so we'll continue again on Friday. All right, thank you very much, and that concludes this OLL live event. Thanks.